everyone. Wow, it is packed in here. How many of you were at the concert last night? So you guys know what this means, right? You know what I'm about to do? Does anyone? Yeah? Should I? Should I? Maybe not where the monitor is. For those that weren't at the concert, Benson Boone is famous for doing backflips. I am not. But here's my goal. I have two amazing co-presenters. I'm going to attempt to get them to do it. You think that's a good idea? I think so. They don't know that yet. I am Shibani Ahuja. I've been at Salesforce about a year and a half. And a year and a half, I was in your seat. And I say your seat because you work at TD Bank, and that's where I used to work. I was a customer, and how I ended up at Salesforce was I told a very good customer story at one of Salesforce's internal events, and next thing you know, I'm on this side. And I've got a very unique role at the company, at Salesforce. I'm helping the company build out our go-to-market strategy for how we engage C-suite leaders. So that's CIOs, CFOs, CEOs. So all that means is last year, I met with 587 C-suite leaders. And why this matters is because we're going to bring some of the insights of those conversations with C-suite leaders from like Fortune 200 companies into today's session. And I'm very excited that we're going to talk about this entire shift from AI hype to production. Speakers, we've got Dr. Ali, and I've got Chris. You're going to hear a bit more about who they are, but let's get started. The first thing I have for you is a love letter from our lawyers. Essentially, what it is, it's professing our love to say, please don't make any purchasing decisions on products that are generally, make all your purchasing decisions on products that are generally available today, not anything that you will see in the future. With that, I also want to thank you all for being here, particularly since it's the night after the concert. I know that I had a very, very late night. So I appreciate you all being here, and I appreciate anyone that's come close to the front row. Today, we're going to talk about 3 chapters together. The first is all about building the agentic blueprint. We're going to talk about agentic architecture at a super high level, and this is where you're going to start to see a bit of the 587 conversations that I would have had, how that's come into play. And particularly, as you start to think, Salesforce on stage with Google. What's the synergy? What's the competition? What's the story, and what's the spice? Second, we are going to have an incredible SME, Dr. Ali, that works at Google, that's going to come in and tell us a bit more about this partnership. And the last piece is the hot seat. A good buddy of mine, Chris Peña, is going to be on stage. He also is an advisor, ex-CIO. He works at Salesforce. He's had even more conversations than I've had with CIOs, and he's going to do a bit of storytelling of how our customers have really applied this great partnership of Salesforce and Google together. Now, let's get started with the first chapter. Has anyone heard about this stat? 95% of use cases fail to deliver value. They fail to make it into production. They fail, insert whatever it is. Now, this has been it was in August of 2025 that this MIT study came out, and all of a sudden there was just this like sudden, ooh, what's happening? Is AI bad? Is it good? The reality was, AI, it's the smallest, biggest word. There's predictive AI, there's generative AI, and there's agentic AI. This stat was all about generative AI. It was about fit for purpose. It was about finding a use case that could solve a particular problem as a co-pilot, as an aid, put it into production. But the scaling part was very hard. And a big component of it, now it's not to say, while we're talking about agentic AI and agentic architecture today, it doesn't mean that there isn't something that we can learn from that MIT study and from some of the failures that happened, which was, how do we build these use cases, these pilots, and now actual proper agents in production that scale? What happened was there was a big conversation around the myth of the model. I would meet with CIOs early in the year last year, and we would start to talk about agentic AI. And immediately what I would hear is, no, I've got my model, and I've got my data scientists. We're going to build our own. And it was just a bit surprising to say, like, that model is very important, absolutely critical. Your data scientists, even more critical. But that's a brain in the jar. What about the rest of the parts and pieces that help to bring that model to life, that allow an agent to actually be able to do the work? And what we at Salesforce, what we started to think about was, well, let's not talk about products. I think first we're at a moment where we actually have to educate a bit more on what is agentic AI. What is actually needed? What is necessary? What is the architecture? And what we started to think about, as the way to think about it is this way. There's a system of context. understanding all of your data, historical grounding in all of your data. You then have your actual systems of work. Think of this as sales, service marketing, the CRM, the applications in which your colleagues work today. And that's the muscle. Then you got your systems of agency. This is where you're actually able to build your agents, to test your agents, to ensure confidence, observability, auditability, that these agents, quarterly check-ins to ensure that these agents are performing as humans do. And then last is the systems of engagement. You've got to have a space and a place. I'm going to give you lots of slides. Don't worry. You can keep taking pictures. It makes my heart flutter a little when you take pictures. Let me know, and I'll pose for you as you're taking that picture. The last one is that system of engagement, is the interface. Where is that agent either going to speak to a customer? Where are they going to speak to a colleague? How are they going to engage? And so the way I looked at this was, I have a 4-year-old son. I have 4-year-old analogies, therefore. My difference, the way I look at generative AI and the architecture necessary for generative AI relative to agentic AI is like this. Generative AI. You know Iron Man? Do you have any Marvel comic fans? One rock solid. Okay, all right, a few. Perfect. So you can test if I say it the right way. So Iron Man, imagine Iron Man. Iron Man decides that he's going to take his arm, he's going to bolt it off and do something cool and make it automated and something very, very generative. Now, fit for purpose, maybe he wants to be a chef, an iron chef. So he bolts on a whole new frying pan so that he can do something with it. That is generative. He's fit for purpose. He's chosen a particular area, particular process that's going to aid and assist him. A component part, generative AI. When a CIO says to me they're going to architect their own agentic AI, the way I describe it is interesting. That's like taking the adamantium out of Wolverine's body. Again, this is for the fans in the audience. The skeletal structure that you would have within Wolverine's body, that's like saying you're going to rip out that skeletal structure and you're going to re-architect it and put it back in. I'm pretty sure Wolverine wouldn't survive something like that. And the reality is that skeletal structure, these, your context, your work, your agency, your engagement, these are essentially what enable agents to traverse the virtual halls of your organization. It's not about ripping it out. It's not about replacing it. It's not about the conversation I'm going to build versus buy. And that was when the earlier conversations had started. It was build versus buy. Then it was, no, it's going to be SaaS versus hyperscaler. So this is where companies like Salesforce and Google started to be like, well, which one's it going to be? What we're starting to see now is, in recognition of that skeletal body of Wolverine, it's less about build, buy, SaaS, hyperscaler. It's more about who are the organizations within my company, within my skeletal structure, that are doing the work to become agentically native agentic integration. Who are the partners that are working together? And that's a lot of what you're going to see and hear about today. Now, what we did was we applied this logic of this high-level architecture, these layers, to our own organization. We said, okay, very important, absolutely important is the models. We know that those foundational models are always going to be very important, so let's make sure that we've got that. Then we've got systems of context, where you start to see Data 360 is the product that we've got within. We've got Informatica, we've got MuleSoft. But what you're starting to see on the right side, and this is something that I really like about the direction of Salesforce, you're starting to see other logos. You're starting to see Snowflake, Databricks, Azure. These are a lot of the technologies that we had in our last organization. It's about choose your lake, choose your warehouse. Then when you start to move into systems of work, this is like the sales, service, marketing, the applications that your colleagues and teams work in today. It's not out of the flow of work, it's in the flow of work. And again, you see Oracle, Workday, you see Adobe, the openness, the interconnectedness. Then you've got your systems of agency, the actual tools that you use to build your agents, whether that is the testing beforehand to ensure that you've got confidence that that agent is going to do as they are expected to do, whether it is the guardrails, how you can establish determinism versus non-determinism or probabilistic behavior. And then you've got your systems of engagement. Now here at Salesforce, we use Slack. Some organizations, you could see a Teams logo. How often do you ever see Salesforce putting a Teams logo? But it is your system of engagement. It is where your colleagues and your customers may show up. Now, there is a better together story, because a lot of people would say, well, I don't know, like I already have my systems, I already have Google, I already have GCP, I already have this, and that. How is it all going to come together? We've got 5 ways in which the story starts to come together, and it's a bit of a beautiful story. It's that activating that taking that trusted data and activating it everywhere. Whether it is sitting in a lake, whether it's sitting in a warehouse, whether it's sitting in a Google Cloud BigQuery place, whether it's sitting in your Salesforce CRM, the need still exists being able to harmonize that and activate it real time so that your agents have access to that trusted data. Second piece is all about deploying agents with maximum intelligence. It's knowing when you've got flexible autonomous agents versus when you've got state-of-the-art AI models. Those models are being leveraged to be able to power those agents. You've got agents that can connect across the enterprise. Again, whether you've got enterprise agents that take action or specialized. That was a big debate of SaaS versus hyperscalers. I want to move fast, I want something out of the box, or do you want deep customization? You don't have to choose one or the other. You know, it's starting to become a world where you're not going to have a single platform for every single agent across your entire enterprise. But it's choosing the right agent for the right moment and bringing it together. Then you've got your supercharging every colleague with productivity tools. You've got the Google Suite and engagement tools like Slack. So being able to access all of your documents through Slack if you're using Slackbot, if you're using any of these tools to engage as colleagues and where the agents are sitting. And then last, you've got, we're delivering AI-powered service experiences. And again, the story of how Salesforce, get out of your way, Salesforce and Google are able to come together. Now, we are continuing to ground the enterprise and to be able to power together. So you saw the earlier layer cake of how we look at our systems of context. We look at our systems of work, systems of agency, and systems of engagement. This is the money slide where you start to see how all of those pieces fit together. Where you see Salesforce and our applications and how we show up. We've got the systems of engagement. And where you've got features and functionality within the Google ecosystem that allow us to fit better together. Dr. Ali is going to give us a bit more details in this, but this is where you start to see, like using Google Maps MCP to help agents understand location. That partnership is starting to come together. Got a few more cameras. I'm going to pause for dramatic effect, allow you all to take these pictures. And with that, I would love to now invite up to stage Dr. Ali, who's going to take it to a little deeper level. Now, this man is a SME if I've ever seen one. All I had to say was I'm presenting with Dr. Ali, and suddenly my points went up like incremental. So I would love to welcome on stage my fellow co-presenter, Dr. Ali, who's going to talk about accelerated trusted AI with Salesforce and Google. There you are.
How are you?
Good.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here with us today. And so Shibani is a tough act to follow, by the way. She's fantastic. So some of the challenges and opportunities that we're seeing in the enterprise space as we look at our partnership and the broader industry are geared around what we would call the intelligence layer, how you do reasoning. And Gemini 3 is powering the Atlas reasoning engine. This is very important because as you have agents trying to accomplish tasks, how they reason and plan, sequence those tasks is very important. There is also an adoption gap which is involving trust and governance, which basically we're helping to solve through mechanisms that we'll be talking about. And then there's the agentic synergy between agents need to interoperate with agents. Agents need to talk to agents. They need to be able to share data. They need to be able to rely in a trustworthy way, connect to a secure agent, and move on across the enterprise. So the Atlas reasoning engine goes beyond just being able to do things fast. It brings kind of a system to thinking, which is very deliberate, methodical, multi-step, considering the different options, self-correcting. These are the characteristics that Gemini 3 provides as the brain for Agentforce and the Atlas reasoning engine. So what Gemini does is it decomposes tasks, a complex task, into individual manageable chunks and basically delegates these tasks as subtasks to the specific agents that are relevant to it. Gemini has the ability to reflect, implementing the reflection pattern, the react pattern, so that it self-corrects itself, especially when you're prompting it. When you're not prompting it, it has that mechanism for understanding through its reasoning capability how to self-correct. And one of the important other things around getting things done in the agent-oriented world, you have actions that agents take. And those actions are implemented through function calling, through tool calling. you have APIs, whether it's through MCP or other or A2A protocols, you have the mechanism to call these tools to perform actions. So selecting the right API to call is extremely important. That's why a very powerful frontier model like Gemini 3 is very important to power the reasoning engine, the Atlas reasoning engine, because you can then designate the correct API to call. Let's say you're doing loan servicing, as an example. What type of loan? Depending on the context, you want to choose the right type of loan. Let's say someone wants a student loan. You're not going to give them a home equity line of credit, right? That's a different kind of loan. So choosing the right function is extremely important. So characteristics of Gemini 3 and 3.1 right now, very large context windows, top of the leaderboard in terms of business reasoning for business use cases. It's been obtaining gold medals at the Math Olympiad, so it actually does computation very well relative to its predecessors and others in the industry. So having a 1500 ELO reasoning score makes it a top-ranked model in complex business logic for things that your production enterprise requires. Gemini is also multimodal. So imagine some companies train models vertically. They train it on text, they train it on images, on video, on sound, etc. With Gemini, we train all of these in an integrated fashion, bottom up. So imagine an Apollo mission that has some visuals, it has some text, it has some sound. And let's say the logs for the Apollo mission are being trained with Gemini. So all of these things, the voice of the astronauts, what's going on in the background, the text, the effects of the logs, the visuals, all are trained together. So imagine if you could go to one of these modalities and say, Armstrong's foot is coming down on the moon. You just pause the video there and say, what is that moment? So Gemini will know it's when Neil Armstrong was beginning to say, one small step for man, one giant step for mankind. So the text will be coordinated. So this is what we mean when we talk about multimodality as a fundamental capability that's taught into the Gemini models. So multimodality in that sense is very important. These are interchangeable. And so what we're doing also with our partnership with Salesforce is the cognitive reasoning engine behind the Atlas reasoning engine gives you the ability to have true enterprise scale. And essentially what this does is it puts Gemini as kind of the prefrontal cortex for your agents, so they can think with that level of depth, that level of complexity, and basically produce results that are less hallucinatory, produce results that are more reliable, and so the trust and governance capabilities that we need are further enhanced. So the challenges we were talking about earlier, trust and security, are typically around hallucinations and data leakage into public training data set. That's one top concern. The complexity of integration between CRM and clouds creates a brittle, do-it-yourself kind of agent architecture. With that zero copy that we have with Salesforce, the data's right there. There's no reason to transfer any data. The integration is innate. And so rather than having a black box approach, you have thinking tokens. You have capabilities to look at the, quote, thoughts of the agent, in this case, the reasoning, Atlas reasoning engines, Gemini Enterprise, so you can kind of look at the explainability and rationale behind why it planned a certain way and why it actually took action in a certain way. This traceability and transparency builds trust, because if you know what something is doing and is no longer a black box, you can open it and it's clear why why a loan wasn't processed, or why a particular customer's trend is in such a fashion. It's going up or down, or there's a possibility of churn, etc. So black box reasoning is basically a very big auditory compliance regulation risk with the ability to have a thinking model such as Gemini, rationalize the actions, you have much better visibility into the steps. So the total cost of ownership is essentially decreased, the ROI is increased. Remember, a lot of people talk about tokenomics these days. How many tokens and what would it cost in terms of tokens? Tokens are important short term, but strategically thinking, outcomes are extremely important. So having an outcome-based approach is what we would like to have. So overcoming these adoption barriers between Salesforce and Google, partnering together addresses these barriers, and this trust gap is co-engineered together between Salesforce and Google from the ground up. So privacy policy basically is implemented. We have an Einstein trust layer that goes beyond what normally is there, and we have a secure infrastructure with our Gemini Enterprise platform that keeps your data governed in a specific boundary. We never use the data, customer data, to train models, and we are essentially looking for avoiding the do-it-yourself complexity that is a silent budget killer. These custom connectors that we have are essentially working between the integration layers and enabling us to access data at the right time and right place. And the zero-copy architecture between Data Cloud and BigQuery eliminates that connector problem, so you don't have to go from one place to another. You can directly connect, and the agent can then reason favorably, confidently over that data so that it looks at where the data lives at that moment without movement risk, without delay risk. So together, Salesforce and Google have built an exceedingly powerful, trustworthy reasoning engine that is at the core of this partnership. So these guardrails are based on the Salesforce trust layer with zero retention architecture, ensuring data stays in Salesforce. Google Zero Copy, where access to BigQuery data in Agentforce is there without moving any information. We have reasoning traces that give real-time visibility into what are the decisioning thoughts that Gemini had in order to plan and reason and act. And ultimately, this enables us to have full visibility into the logic steps of the agent so that we can do caching, efficient token usage for complex tasks. In the tiered model approach that we have Gemini Pro and Flash and Flash Lite, and ensure that data is fresh with bidirectional federation that exists between Salesforce and BigQuery. So in terms of the technical deployment, we have the AI agent that can access BigQuery directly without necessarily having to do expensive ETLs. And no ETL means that there's no stale data. And the agents can always reason over fresh, real-time, accurate information with no outdated snapshots. So in order to do so, the Atlas reasoning engine runs a pattern we call the reason, act, observe loop, where it reasons, it takes action, it observes, looks at the feedback, and then executes commands. So the agent, meaning with the Gemini brain, decomposes the steps. It calls Salesforce flows or Google search tools using autonomous action. It observes the results, evaluates whether the goal was met, and refines its plan if the goal hasn't been met. And so looking at how this seamless integration works, we can understand that agents need to actually go out and search for information in real time. This is grounding with Google Search, powered by Gemini 3, and with the ability to connect to Google Workspace to enact a very seamless flow of information from human to computer. With that, I would like to invite Shibani back to the stage, and thank you very much. This is yours.
Aw, thank you. Love that. Well, friends, this is so sweet. Can you sign it for me? He signed it. Okay, friends, I'm back. I am back. That was, did I tell you that this man is an expert or what? Thank you so much. Now, I'm gonna bring on someone who I know is slightly nervous. Do you wanna know why I know that he's a little bit nervous? Chris Peña, come on out as I embarrass you and I tell you why you're nervous. Come on out, Chris Peña. Let's give Chris a big warm welcome. Okay, so I'll tell you why this guy is nervous right now. I thought that we would go out. I thought that we would party last night. And then I heard that he didn't even go to the concert because he was nervous about what I might do. Is that true?
Yes, that is true.
Okay.
That
he
is
and I
very
have done
true.
a few road shows where I always get to ask the questions. He is always the poor sucker that's in the seat over here.
I'm always in the hot seat.
Yeah, always. And the first question that I'm going to ask you is not even on the script, just because, I thought I'd stay true to form.
Uh-oh.
Chris, do you know how to do a backflip?
Absolutely not. I do not know how to do
Does
a backflip.
anyone in the crowd know how to do a backflip?
Any gymnasts?
No? I don't
No.
know. Okay, well, you having fun?
I am.
You behaved?
I have behaved, and John knows that. This has been amazing. This is my 4th time in Vegas since January.
Oh my, so sorry about that.
Yeah. It's not all your fault.
Chris, why don't you tell the crowd a bit of what you do? I gave him a teaser earlier, but tell them a bit about what you do.
Sure. So I've been at Salesforce actually last week was a year. My title is CIO advisor. I was a long-time Salesforce customer. I'm now kind of on the other side of the table.
Yep.
Like yourself, I spend a lot of time talking to technology leaders across a multitude of industries and types of organizations. And it's been so enlightening because when I get to spend time with these folks, I get all these different perspectives and kind of where they are in this journey. They all have the same concerns, though, which we'll touch on that. Just this week alone, I've met with 3 CIOs across varying. So one was an $85 billion agricultural company. The other one was a large electronics components and distribution company. All kind of, when I try to box it, they all have kind of this fear and concern of what they're going to do next and how they're going to bring value to the organization. The one thing I will say that has been consistent, the CIO is now being viewed as somebody that has to bring value and not just an operator.
Yeah, and Dr. Ali also said that this is about outcomes, not outputs.
Yep.
So you're a good storyteller. We're going to have you tell a few stories today to be able to speak on behalf of our customers. Starting with the first one, so when you're moving from a Gemini-powered pilot to production, what is the biggest reality check that hits for a CIO? Tell us about the stories that you're hearing.
Yeah, I'm not going to say in every case, but in most cases, this idea of context has been the biggest challenge. And I think you put up the famous 95% failure rate and all this stuff. And I know people are probably like, oh yeah, I've heard that. But a lot of the truth behind it is that a lot of times these things fail. I think it's for 2 reasons. I think the context one is a really big one. The other one is the human aspect of it as well, and people not understanding, am I just being busy and active because somebody told me to go build something, but then I don't actually understand the value? And then what happens is these things get deployed and they're like, okay, this is cool, but it's not adding value. It doesn't have the right context, right? And I'll give you an example. So one of our joint customers, Fisher and PayCal, they were they were early adopters of Agentforce, using our customer service agent. But they were like, okay, this is cool. I can look up customer information quickly. I could probably do that by opening the customer record. We're not moving the needle with that. And they weren't moving the needle because they didn't have access to all the right information. So then Gemini comes in and said, Gemini has access to some of this other data that maybe doesn't sit in Sales Cloud, doesn't sit in Service Cloud. How do we expose that so that now we could do more and this is around appliances. By the way, they're one of the predominant appliance companies in the world. They were able to do self-service for over 70% of those requests around appliances. Now, because they had access to this data. And it was basically bringing Gemini together with our service agent. And it was incredible. And here's the thing and I'll probably highlight this more than once, these are not things that took months. We're counting in weeks to get these things done. So it was an amazing story. So a 70% deflection rate, right? Where you can just get things solved without having to speak to a human. And then if they need to, obviously, you have the ability to get them there. But that's just an amazing story for a very large customer of ours that's seen immediate success.
You know, I like to, you brought up the word context in terms of the biggest reality check. I really like to think of agents as almost like humans. Like you have a new colleague that starts in an organization, you're not just going to give them a binder that has a ton of acronyms in it and not actually define what those acronyms means and share a bit of the context of the organization, all of those details is the same as you would need for these agents to be able to action appropriately.
Yeah, it's so funny that you mentioned that because, and I'm sorry I cut you off, but I was talking to the CIO this week. They were, we're doing this whole like Informatica thing, and we're going to do, and we define customer 56 different ways. Like, what? So now you really need to have that context in order to interpret when you say customer, what do you really mean in that context? And sorry, it just kind of popped in, and
you know what's popping in my head now? I've got my hat. It says Big Data Energy. I feel like my hat, I need a new one. It used to be like data is the new bacon. It's like context is the new bacon. I don't know if it's as sexy as Big Data Energy, though.
Yeah.
All right, let's get to the next one. We hear this so many times. I already have my data in Google Cloud. Like, why? Why Salesforce? Why do I need Data 360? Come on.
We get that question all the time. In fact, we get even more broadly now because it's like, oh, what's the difference between MuleSoft and Informatica and Data 360, right? And all these organizations, there's no lack of data, right? This idea that now you need to make that data actionable, right? So it's sitting in BigQuery, right? It's sitting in Google storage, but that's great. How do we make that data actionable? So that's what Data 360 does. And to give you an example, there's actually one of the largest retailers in South Africa. They have about 15 brands. They had an issue where they had 64 million customer profiles, right? And these customer profiles, because they were multi-brand, were in more than one platform. Mm-hmm. So we had to go through an exercise with Google and ourselves. How do we rationalize these 64 million customers? And not only that, how do we really identify who these? So we went through this identity exercise, and we used basically zero copy. Didn't do this whole like, hey, let's do an integration and build all this ETL stuff, right? Let's remove the friction from that because that's going to require support and coding. By the way, I can set up zero copy in Data Cloud, so that should tell you something. But this is what happened with Peña. They were able to take those 64 million profiles. We were able to get those identities down to actually 24 million unique customers. So what did that do? Now we got 24 million unique customers. Now I have a complete 360 view of those 24 million customers. But then also what that did is also unlocked across brand 25% more customers that are now available to the broader brands within Peña, which was absolutely amazing. And again, I'm going to emphasize that these are not things that took months to do, right? We're counting in weeks and days to get these kinds of things done.
So identity resolution, trying to get that clearer picture of the customer so you can personalize at scale, so you can start to cross-sell. Okay, all right.
Then, but the other important aspect, which I'm sorry I kind of glossed over, is that where the data is governed and lives, it stays there. So we're not duplicating data anywhere and then potentially causing issues where the data is not, the hygiene of the data is impacted. By doing zero copy, then it's literally creating a view of that data that now is actionable within our platforms.
Cool. Now, we talked about agents. We've got Google agents, we've got Salesforce agents, and we had actually published an agentic maturity model to say, like, even on the scale of AI, you've got your co-pilots, you've got generative AI, oh, you've got your chatbots, the if this then that, then you've got your co-pilots, and then you've got agentic agents, and agentic agents could go from level 1, 2, 3, 4. 4 being where you start to have those agents that are speaking to one another using common protocols. Like, where are you starting to see agents that are actually starting to talk to each other so that they're saving that bottleneck and that human frustration?
Well, you know, people talk about kind of the swivel chair.
Yeah.
So we have a customer, Berlin Packaging, also a Google and Salesforce customer, that if a customer would call in, yeah, we could look at the customer information and kind of basic things, right? So again, not moving the needle enough, right, to say, okay, there's true value here. What we found was working with Google, hey, through Gemini, we can have access now to ERP data that has all their order information, all their order history. So now we did agent-to-agent communication, so A2A, between Gemini and Agentforce, Sales Cloud and Service Cloud, and combined all three. And then what happened was, now when you call in, you're picking up the phone, or now it's an agent, it's all available to me, and a single interface, right? As opposed to saying, okay, I'm gonna go log into the ERP and figure out where these orders are, and then I'm gonna go back to Salesforce and figure out, provide you some information or make any changes to your order and that kind of stuff. So, and again, very simple exercise, one that when they originally started to look at it, wasn't something that was considered. We're like, hey, we have this customer service agent. We'll be great. We'll be able to service our customers.
Yeah.
But it was like, I also need access to this data that sits here that's really around order data and fulfillment and why is an order lost and that kind of stuff. So we were able to bring together Gemini and Agentforce to be able to deliver for them. And that what that meant for them, it was, I saved 20% of my time now that I'm not shifting between. And then it also helped the IT organization where they weren't dealing with these data issues all the time.
Yeah.
Right?
It's crazy to think that it was like about a year ago, or not even a year ago, that we would have these conversations with CIOs using that agentic maturity model going, where are you? A lot of them are still level 1, level 2, but like to hear use cases of organizations that are at level 4, again, less than a year ago, less than 6, 7 months ago, I used to say to folks, like, if you think you're doing a level 4, I'm going to slap your hand. Go back to level 1, go to 2, go to 3, then get to 4. But we are really reaching that stage now.
We are reaching, and if you would have asked me a year ago, I would have been like, oh, this is going to take a couple of years to get there.
Yeah, the speed at which everything is moving. Okay, the famous to build or not to build, DIY. Those that are building their own stacks, DIY. What's the one thing they're going to regret? We're so kind, so polite. Take a tip. What are they going to regret in 6 months?
The amount of change and support and maintenance. Listen, yeah, AI is making it easier, right, to do some of these things. But then now it's like, hey, I'm rewriting business logic or what it is, or I'm rewriting reasoning. And it's so funny because the 3 conversations I had this week was on that particular topic, right? And what I heard, there's a shift actually going on. Because if I would have had that conversation maybe a year and a half ago, those 3 folks would have probably been, I'm going to go build my own thing. In fact, one of them brought it up and said, hey, we were going to build our own insert company name GPT thing, right? Yeah. Which I was going to build agents across the entire enterprise. And self-reflection for them was like, do I really want to be in the business of building this, maintaining the governance, the security, the guardrails, right? Or do I want to focus on how I build stuff that brings value and leverage what Salesforce brings, leverage what Google brings, right? And not try to reinvent the wheel. They're not in the business of, you're not in the business of, you should be leveraging the agents where they live,
right? And
then bringing those things together. This one CIO who's at this electronics distributor and manufacturer, he said to me, he goes, I want to leverage the AI capabilities with my 3 major partners, Google, Salesforce, and X to remain later. But to me, that is the wisest kind of approach. He said, I need to focus on data foundations so that I could service these applications the way they need to be serviced and not try to reinvent and build, because then I'm going to be in a trap of rebuilding these things, having a huge staff of developers, even though we say, hey, we're going to cut down because of AI. it's a maintenance
Yeah.
kind of nightmare.
I also think like the term DIY is in itself so big. Like when you say you're going to DIY, are you going to build your own data center? Are you going to build your own chip? No, you're not going to do that. So I think that there's going to be moments and spaces and places where you are building something, doing it yourself. But like to me, as I have been speaking to CIOs, it's where you build for differentiation. But where you've got a service agent, where you've got a sales agent, and it's out of the box, that's not where your business is going to be differentiated. That's pretty out of the box. But build for a differentiation.
Yeah. Like, where's the competitive advantage it's going to give you, right? So you're going to build a service agent, that's going to give you a competitive advantage? No, leverage what's already been built and move fast and add value.
Yep.
Right?
Yep. And with that, I want to thank you all. This is the end. I think this is the last session. Who's going to be poolside? I will be. Thanks, everyone.
Ready.